Welcome everybody to the second Team Booster video for the Dutch Hacking Held Hack Corona initiative. My name is Damien Nunes for those that haven't seen the first video, and I'm a designer and innovator at the University of Maastricht. In the first video, we dived into design thinking and how it can help you during this hackathon, and today we go much more deeper in this. So I mentioned the double diamond method in the previous video, and it's very important if you go to this kind of trajectory that you first need to define the correct challenge before you go into actually design the solution. So for this video, the second video, you're going to focus on how to better understand the context so you can move from a generic challenge to a specific design challenge. And you will also see that the way you move through this process is maybe different than you are used to regular project processes. And I think this quote sums it up quite nicely. You might already have an idea, or you maybe already know or think you know like what the exact challenge is. But I think Mike Tyson puts it quite nicely. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I think also now we need to acknowledge the coronavirus has punched us in the mouth. We didn't expect this. We were not ready for this, and the standard predict and control basically doesn't work. Right? We need to be a little bit more like Muhammad Ali, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. We need to be agile. We need to be on our toes. We need to look at the problem from different angles, and we need to see basically how we can make how we can best approach this problem and challenge, right? And then we move in step by step, better understand the problem, better understand what solutions do and do not work, in the end, actually tackling this challenge. So, like I said, we're going to focus on understanding the context. And I'm quite sure that some of you have already got a lot of creative ideas, but the goal is to really focus on first coming from a generic challenge to a specific design challenge. So I really urge you to organize within your group to create a so-called ID vault, which can be a simple Google Doc where you will basically write down all your ideas and short descriptions, and that you can use those ideas in the second diamond where you will design the solution. So for now, please save all those great ideas because you need them in the next phase. During this phase, understanding the context, there are different ways to go through this. You can use logic and reasoning. So basically, with the knowledge that you already have within your team, you can try to better understand what's actually going on. But what is important with this is that you need to be aware of that you only have the knowledge which is in part of your team. Maybe all team members don't have a full perspective on what is relevant. So assumptions are a risk. So it's okay to take assumptions, but if some of those assumptions are still part in the initial, in the final solution, it could be that they make or break your concept. So it's very important to be aware of your assumptions. A way to validate assumptions, to know more about the context, so to expand your understanding of the context, you can conduct desk and field research. And I think especially desk research is quite important now as mobility is limited. But still, there might be some team members that maybe are working in the context and or maybe have contact to somebody who can provide you more insights into what's actually going on in the field. And yes, it's often more time consuming and it takes more effort. But if you have too many assumptions within your understanding of the context, you might focus on the wrong challenge. So it's very important to have a good balance between logic and reasoning, but also conducting desk and field research. So you can go through this process within 5-10 minutes if you just use logic and reasoning, and you're able to have a very productive session. It can be more like a workshop, for instance. So you need a facilitator to help you with that. So you can go through it in 15 minutes and already collectively define your design challenge. It's okay if there are some assumptions in that, but as I said before, if you are aware of that, then that is not an issue. But sometimes, if you look at our projects, this phase can even last, yeah, up to 4 weeks or maybe even longer. So it's also up to you to see a little bit like what is a good balance to allocate your time. Well, if we move into this diamond, there are basically four things you really need to be aware of. So one, the first aspect is the target group, and you should really be asking yourself, who are you actually focusing on? It can be one person, it can be an organization, it can be a group. Maybe there are multiple stakeholders, but it's very important to be very clear on who are you trying to help. Be specific, and if you have defined who you're going to focus on, you can extrapolate their needs, ambitions, pains, etc. Well, the second aspect is the environment, and that's basically the environment in which your target group is acting in. So that can be a social environment, a physical environment, or a digital environment, and we go into that in more depth in a few slides further. Um, and within that context, there might also be interesting objects you can make use of or you have to be aware of. But let's make that a little bit more concrete further down this presentation. And the third aspect is interaction. So you have people, you have an environment, you have objects, and in a certain way they interact with each other over time. In order to deliver care to patients, for instance, there's a certain interaction, there's a certain journey, a certain process that takes place, which is functional, but also emotions play there a big role. So, for instance, you could imagine that anxiety, for instance, can play a big role. Then also the emotional journey, emotional interaction is something to be aware of. And lastly, I think it's very important to focus on the success. When are you successful in your project? When should you stop the project? So also we will shortly dive into qualifying success and also quantifying success. All right. Without further ado, let's move forward to the target group. So focus on who has a need or a certain ambition. So for instance, let's take the case of the shortage of protective face masks. So let's take that as an example. Are we going to focus on all citizens in the Netherlands? Is that the focus of your project? Yes or no? Or are you only going to focus on the hospitals and the people that work in that environment? Or are you going to focus on a specific kind of employee, for instance, within the hospital, because they might need it the most? So from there, if you have a priority, and I mean, it's up to you also. You know the context. You should understand, like, okay, where is the biggest need? You can further dive into, well, what is this need exactly, right? So how big is it, and why does he or she has that need, right? So how can you also better understand what you should provide? And lastly, if you have this discussion within your group, or an expert could maybe bring in that perspective into your group, you can basically make yeah, maybe you can draw it up in this way with low needs, high needs, and from there you can prioritize what is the actual challenge you want to focus on. And maybe by doing so, you find out, well, nurses need a different kind of mask than, for instance, if we want to help certain kind of citizens. For instance, elderly, maybe you want to protect elderly, they need a different kind of mask than, for instance, medical staff. So already by having this discussion, you come up with a lot of interesting insights which can help you in your project. So tools that you can use for this are, for instance, persona templates. I think there are some of those templates provided on WebEx, and otherwise you have, yeah, prioritization matrices or segmentation can help you with that. Don't make it too complex. But if there are, for instance, some designers or people that are familiar with the especially more segmentation or prioritization matrices, They can help you execute this, but be pragmatic with it. Don't overdo it. Well, if you have defined your target group, then we will look into the environment. Like I said before, look at the social environment, so what stakeholders play a role, but also look at the physical environment, what space and objects play a role. So if we're looking at, for instance, at the medical staff, like, okay, in what kind of environment are they acting? What kind of objects are there that we need to be aware of? That can be an opportunity we could further leverage. And it's not only the physical environment that plays a role, but also the digital environment. And for instance, communication is quite important, but well, really be specific, like, okay, well, how is the digital environment looking around this target group? For instance, elderly at home, do they have access to the internet? What kind of interfaces do they actually use? Do they have an iPad? Can we leverage that? Yes or no? These are very important things that we need to be aware of. And yeah, assumptions here are very critical. So be aware of your assumptions because they might be wrong. So be sure you take that into consideration. So if you look at the environment, you can also have more an internal focus. So maybe you look into the specific ward of the, for instance, hospital, or maybe you're going to look into the context of an elderly living at home. You could start with asking yourself the question, okay, what stakeholders play a role here, right? So is it are there maybe yeah, the patient itself, or maybe the doctors, nurses? But if you think about, for instance, the protective mask, maybe also a purchasing department plays an important role in this whole ecosystem, right? So don't only look at the user, maybe there are also other stakeholders that play an important role, decision makers, for instance. And a stakeholder map is a very practical tool you can use to make an inventory of the stakeholders, maybe also draw connections between them, and also highlight which ones are more important. And if you highlighted which ones are the most important, you can also, maybe if that is necessary, create a profile for them or extract basically what are their needs. And maybe there are some conflicting needs, maybe some are complementary, and it's good to be aware of that. Well, you can also have an external focus. So if you're looking at the protective face mask, it's not only the hospital, maybe the distributor plays an important role, or maybe the producer plays an important role. So a tool which you can use is, for instance, a value chain analysis. And if you have more this external focusing, looking at what's happening around the hospital with regard to, for instance, protective face masks, you, for instance, come across, well, maybe it is a production problem. There's not enough face masks being produced. Or maybe you see, well, there are enough being produced, but the distribution is an issue because the borders, for instance, are closed. We cannot get foreign face masks basically to the Netherlands. So the challenge is maybe somewhere else, or maybe you see it's an economic problem. You see, for instance, that in some cases the prices of face masks are going up. So they are available, but they are too expensive. So how can you deal with that? And it's very important to have this discussion also to have a better understanding what is going on. So if you know the target group, if you better understand their environment, you can also better zoom in into the interaction that takes place between those stakeholders, the environment, and maybe certain objects. So then you can look into the personal perspective. So how does a certain activity, moment, or day look like of your target group? And this is important to, for instance, see, well, how does a day for an elderly person look like, or how does a day look like for a nurse, for instance? And then you can better understand not only what the problem is, but where and when it actually happens. So for this personal perspective, you could, for instance, use a so-called customer journey or user journey or patient journey, the different names for that, or experience map. So these tools basically help you to map out how does this journey look like for a certain target group? So what steps, what phases is this person going through? What are things that are going well? What are things that are not going well? So maybe you saw that you thought like, well, the need is at moment G, for instance, in this occasion, but you find out like actually the origin of this problem starts at B or position D. So then you know like, okay, this is basically where the needs come from, but we could do something earlier in the process, earlier in the journey to solve this issue. Well, besides the personal perspective, you can also take a more system perspective. So, what activities are being executed by whom or what to deliver a certain result? So, that can be people, but it can also be systems, right, that work together in providing a certain outcome. So, you can use process maps, flowcharts, and the different kind of tools that you can use for that. Um, I'm sure you can. They will also be provided on the WebEx environment, and they can help you to better map and understand how processes actually work. And from there, you could also see, well, you see behind the scene, well, um, it is an issue that your target group um, yeah, dealing with, but you can see, well, it's actually the issue starts, for instance, at stakeholder, the third stakeholder, which is mapped in your process map, or maybe see, well, the issue starts in a system, for instance, and then you can further zoom in to that perspective. And if you want to combine those, so if you really want to make that connection between the journey of your target group, but also the processes that are actually working together, you can use the so-called service blueprint. So if there are designers, service designers, UX designers that are part of your group, they're very familiar with these tools, and they should be able to help you out. The fourth aspect is success. So, innovation is about realizing impact. I think we should be very clear on that. It's about creating impact. It's not simply delivering a product or a service. A product, yeah, you can create something, you can be proud on that you maybe created something, but if it doesn't deliver the value or the impact that you're looking for, then you actually are not successful. So I think it's very important that we also qualify our success, that we know when we are successful and when we can stop, and or also to quantify our success. So by counting or measuring our success. So you can think about quotes, acquiring quotes, for instance, from important stakeholders, or maybe you can use also metrics. And it is totally up to your context if which ones are relevant. You can make it very analytical, but you can also make it very pragmatic. But just be aware of when are you successful. That's the main question you need to ask yourself. So, for instance, maybe you get some feedback from a target from your stakeholder, and they say, "Well, you really turned a negative situation into a positive one for us all." Maybe that's already enough for you to have the acknowledgement. You did a good job, and now you can move on maybe to another challenge. Or maybe stakeholder tells you, well, 100,000 face masks is exactly what we needed. Well, maybe you actually know, like, okay, how many face masks are you actually focusing on? Is it 100,000? Is it 1 million? And maybe is it per week? Is it per month, per day, etc. It's very important to be specific on that. Or maybe it's more based on time. So you've helped us decrease waiting times by 6 days for instance, patients. Then it's also yeah, very tangible, like what is the actual impact that you created. And or maybe we can help twice as much patients as before. I mean, it's also very clear. So when you are working in a team, you will be working digitally. So this image is not fully depicting like how you're going to work together. Because you need to be aware that some of you might be experts in the field, they know the context, and others are maybe more novice or they are externals, they don't know the context at all, or maybe just a little. And it's very important to be aware of the dynamic within a group because novice, they when they come up with ideas, it could be that they create ungrounded ideas. And why do they create ungrounded ideas? Because they don't know the context. They come up with a lot of creativity, but they're not sure how they fit into the context. So it's just an idea in midair. But on the other hand, experts can, not all, can have the issue of so-called expert paralysis. They know the context so well that they cannot basically break free of that context. And yeah, expert paralysis can be an issue also for creativity. So a positive thing of novice of newcomers to a certain context is that they can bring in a fresh perspective. Maybe they work in a different sector, and that can really also yeah bring a positive vibe and positive insight also into the group dynamics. And on the other hand, the experts, they have a certain context understanding, which is very valuable. So if you bring this all together, you see that newcomers and experts, they influence each other. So experts can provide the context. So they can provide the context so that novice team members, they can create more grounded ideas because it helps them to think inside the box. When we think about creativity, we often think about outside of the box thinking, but I think for newcomers outside, it's very important that they think more inside of the box. Well, the fresh perspective, on the other hand, challenges also the context. Maybe it's not a box, the box is maybe not square, but maybe the box is more circular. So they challenge also a little bit like how the context actually is. Maybe some things are not exactly how we always thought they are. Maybe things changed also now due to the coronavirus. So this challenging of the context helps also experts to think outside of the box. So this also helps to overcome the expert paralysis. So you see that this dynamic, you really have to acknowledge each other and also work together, listen to each other, because it helps each other to come up to a more innovative idea that actually can create traction and impact. So what is important if you have this dialogue with each other, if you have this interaction within your team, to not always do that in a more like standard business meetings, because research has really shown that they are not efficient and effective. That there are better ways basically to structure those sessions. And if there are team members that are more familiar with facilitating design sprints or innovation trajectories, they can really help to move away from only discussing things to a more hands-on approach to sharing insights and ideas. So I think it's very important that we also start writing. I see a lot of business meetings where we talk a lot, but people are not writing, and even less, I see people actually drawing. Very important to see how things are connected with each other to understand what the actual problem is. And everybody needs to be on the same page. And that really helps to make it concrete in text, but even better, maybe sometimes in drawings. So maybe just make a sketch, make a photo, share it on your digital working platform, because that is really the way to move forward. And from there, yeah, you can basically create synergies, and that is what innovation is all about: creating synergies between various team members. So, if we look at the understanding of the context, and you have, for instance, identify, well, there are some production-related problems when it comes to, for instance, face masks or distribution problems, economic problems. You could, for instance, ask yourself, why is that exactly an issue? You could further uncover, understand what are the underlying drivers or issues, for instance, for those key things that you already identified. So a very simple tool is just by asking 5 times why, or just multiple times. And maybe you find out, well, there's insufficient capacity. Why is there insufficient capacity? You can go further. Maybe you have the answer. Maybe you have to get that insight into your group. Maybe there are no raw materials anymore. Okay, what kind of raw materials are needed? What are the characteristics of this material? Maybe there are other ways to, for instance, um, um, yeah, have the same kind of specifications to those face masks, but with a different material. Or if a distribution problem, well, maybe producers are unreachable because the borders are closed. Or maybe there's a misalignment between partners, right? So Maybe it's not very clear who has what needs, and the distribution of those face masks between the Netherlands, maybe that is an issue. Or maybe the economic, well, market dynamics, for instance, they create a price which is too expensive. So why is that, etc. If you ask those questions, you better understand what is the actual underlying issue. So from there, if you have this better and deeper understanding of the context of what are the issues, you can prioritize the challenges. So maybe you say, well, we want to focus on insufficient capacity, or maybe a combination of that with raw materials. So you can highlight what are the sub challenges you would like to focus on. Maybe there's one, maybe there are more. So if you understand the context, we have a better understanding like where are the issues. You could move actually in creating those specific design challenges. The tool that you can use for that is the so-called "How might we" question. I will explain in more detail why these questions can be very helpful. But design challenges, they need to be very relevant to the context. That's why this contextual understanding is crucial. Furthermore, they should be challenging, not easy to solve. If it's straightforward, maybe you don't need design thinking. Maybe you can directly move towards a solution. But be careful. Do you actually know the context as well as that you think you know that? Also, be not too specific with your design challenge. If your solution is already embedded within your challenge, it doesn't really spark any creativity. On the other hand, if it's too open, there's no real focus, and then you get ideas maybe that are not grounded, which I already mentioned before. And like I said, maybe there are different ways, different routes to solve this issue. So multiple challenges, design challenges is possible, and also encourages also to be more creative. Yeah. So how might we question could be, for instance, if we focus more on production, how might we triple the production capacity of protective face masks on short notice? Already by asking yourself this question, you might come up with two, three, four, five, six ideas how we could triple the production capacity. We also are very specific here because we say it should be tripled, not just a couple of more face masks. No, it should be actually triple. So that's maybe a bigger challenge and needs a little bit more creativity. Or maybe another production related issue is, for instance, how might we ensure the safety of our hospital staff without the availability of material X? You could say, well, maybe we use a different material, or maybe we use a total different way of creating safety for our hospital staff. Maybe there's another option besides masks. I don't know, but that could be something to explore with your team. And maybe if it's a more economic driven challenge, you could ask yourself the question, how might we stimulate resellers to lower the retail price of protective face masks? So yeah, basically, how could we battle the market dynamics that now work against us? I think those are very interesting questions. You could reframe them differently, but this is just a first example on how you could frame design challenges. And as you see below, also the design space can further help to give you a better focus on what the actual challenge is and what opportunities are. So the design space is basically the space in which around your design challenge, which can help to come up with ideas. So maybe there's certain requirements that you've received from talking to, for instance, nurses or medical staff or patients, etc. Maybe you saw certain opportunities within a customer journey or in a process map, for instance, or limitations. It's very important to list them next to your design challenges. So when you start coming up with creative ideas, you can make use of opportunities or be aware of limitations and thinking about how could you overcome them, for instance. Well, like I said, how might we questions? Why do they work? Well, it's because there are three aspects which are quite crucial. So the how is very actionable. They challenge you to explain how we could do it, and that drives action. Might is a word that is more suggestive. We could do it in this way, we could do it in that way, or we could do it in a third way, for instance. So it sparks multiple ideas. And furthermore, the we is very inclusive. So just by asking this question to another team member or maybe somebody at home or at work, you already can get maybe even more ideas. So this inclusive aspect is also very important. What you also should be aware of is that people are not standing still. Things are constantly changing, new developments, etc. And also other people that really want to contribute. So also be aware of, for instance, initiatives that are already there, maybe ideas that you can leverage from from China, for instance, or from Italy, or different part of the world. Or maybe you also saw that, for instance, you saw something in a different context that you can apply here. So it's also very interesting that you also acquire some extra input and be aware of what's going on. Maybe you could work together with another initiative. Just make one call, maybe can already help to put your project 2 or 3 steps ahead. Be aware of what's going on. Don't work in isolation. Albert Einstein, he said, if I had only 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. So again, I know that we are in a situation where we have the needs or we have the feeling we need to act fast. But if we act too fast, in the end, we might miss our target or it might take us longer to actually get to a success. So really also as a time, get a little bit more rest into your team and then go out instead of just only running towards a solution. So I'm going to give you an overview here with the tools. So like I said before, focus on your target group. There are different tools there that you can use. So who's your target group? What is the environment around him or her or an organization? The interactions that there are with this target group or within an organization. When are you successful? Point 4. And from there, define the design challenge. And like I said before, it's very important to stay pragmatic, right? You can normally with these kind of projects, you could really take a lot longer. But now we have to be pragmatic and just use the tools that are applicable and don't overdo it. So I think it's time for you to organize yourself. Let those questions sink in. So determine together with your group what is the unknown. Do we actually understand the full context? Also make sure that everybody is up to speed. So maybe you have a clear idea how the context looks like. Then also maybe clearly use some of those tools that you also can convey that message to others. It's a check for yourself, but also very helpful for the others. From there, you could divide work. So, for instance, well, we need to further research on this, or we maybe need to do something there. Divide those various tasks, go out, discover, do field research, do desk research, use your network if you cannot go to a certain location, so you can acquire that input. And from there, find also a way, not a standard business meeting, but maybe see also how you can better structure your sessions. Maybe somebody can take the lead and facilitate those sessions to share insights, to share ideas, and from there also define what is the actual challenge. Maybe there's something underlying the original challenge, and it's very important to uncover that we really know what is going on, but also that we can work together with maybe other initiatives if that is needed. Okay, furthermore, the last point, very important to know and acknowledge each other's superpowers. So maybe you can make something, maybe you know somebody that can really help to further fuel your project. So yeah, very important also to also get to know each other. Just take a few minutes to get to know each other. What do you do? And what can you provide? But maybe also where do you need some assistance? All right, for the next video, we dive into the second phase of the double diamond process. So you should have, when you start with that video, you should already have the design challenge or multiple design challenges ready, and you better know what is the design space. And from there, I'm going to give you some practical tools how to move to a specific solution. So we're going to give you some tips, tricks, tools, some ideation techniques. So how do you come up with multiple ideas? I think everybody can be creative, and I'm going to give you some tools to do so. rapid prototyping. So then also, if you have an idea, how would it actually look like or work, that you also get a better idea. It's not only in your head, but you're also able to materialize it and reflect better on it. I want to give you some tools, some tips and tricks there, and also how to validate. There are some challenges now, as we are not always directly in the context, but I think validation there's still ways to do that. And a last point to really also think about, well, if we have come up with a solution, well, how can we scale it in? How can we make sure a hospital or a certain stakeholder or organization that is willing to help can actually benefit from it? Or maybe we should start something ourselves. So how should we start it up? Um, I saw that there are various problem definition templates shared on the WebEx environment. You can use them, but also maybe already the questions that I shared with you could already help to come up to a certain design challenge and the criteria. Okay, that is it for now. Good luck with your project, and I will be working now on the next video, which will help you further with your hackathon initiative. Good day.